We've heard the country is too broken to fix, that we're too divided, too angry, too far gone. But what if the loudest voices in the room aren't telling us the whole story? Rich Harwood has spent years on the ground in communities across America, and what he's finding might just surprise you. People are ready. They're yearning. And the path forward does not start in Washington, D.C. It starts right where you are. Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The Derate the Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful Derate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. Rich Harwood is the president and founder of the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation. For nearly 4 decades, he's been doing the hard, unglamorous work of rebuilding communities from the inside out in places like Reading, Pennsylvania, Selma, Alabama, and Alamance County, North Carolina. He's the author of 9 books, including his latest, The New Civic Path, Restoring Our Belief in One Another and Our Nation. Rich isn't interested in theories. He's interested in what actually works when people choose to show up for each other. And in this conversation, he's bringing back talk about something he calls a new moral vision. Not a political platform, not a utopian dream, but a grounded, practical call to reclaim what we have in common and use it to build something real. If you've ever wondered whether any of this can actually change, this episode's for you. Let's welcome back to the show my friend, Rich Harwood. Here we go. Rich Harwood, welcome back to the Derate the Hate podcast. It is so good to see you again, my friend.
Wilk, always good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think the last time we were talking here on the podcast, we were talking about the new civic path. You're bouncing around all over the country, just doing these amazing things and the workshops all over the country and helping people out and the times that we're facing in this nation, Rich, really has people on edge in a lot of ways. And now we're talking. We're going to talk today a little bit about a little bit more about the new civic path, that campaign that's being re-upped for this year, but also a new moral vision is kind of the way that I took this article that you recently had in the Fulcrum. So let's talk about that article and what you were going for with that piece that came out in the Fulcrum here back in February.
Yeah, I think when I talk to people, there is a belief that we can't come together and do things, and that we don't agree on anything, and that we're not going to agree on anything, and that any attempt to say that there are things upon which we can agree is often seen as a utopian vision, as something sort of out there, a nice thing that we could get to, but it's not going to be anytime soon. And I actually think that as I travel across the country, as you do, Wilk, and talk to people from all walks of life, what I'm hearing over and over again is that there is a deep yearning to come back into community life. And there is a deep learning to seize a couple of things. One is a set of morals or a set of values that people believe we have lost sight of, we have somehow covered over, we have somehow forgotten, but actually we haven't, right? And what I hear is people saying, look, our society is becoming increasingly cruel, that there are increasingly indecent moments, that we talk about dignity, but we really don't uphold one another's dignity in practice. And so one part of this new moral vision is there is a desire, I think, to embrace a set of values around decency, around belonging, around dignity that sit at the bedrock and need to sit at the bedrock of our society. In addition to that, there is a constellation of issues or concerns that people hold that people will rally around. And in my work, what I'm finding, they are rallying around things around youth, around mental health, around whole health, around seniors. And so what becomes important here is that if we're going to work on these, we need to depoliticize them, focus on what matters to people, call people back to something larger than themselves, and say we can address these bread and butter issues and recreate a sense of can-do spirit in the country, something larger than ourselves. And so I think it's a moral vision because it's something deeper than simply solving problems. It's about articulating and claiming who we seek to become individually and in our shared lives.
Yeah. No, and I hear that from people as well. And one of the things that I go back to in terms of trying to kind of lift people up when they find themselves getting down is that thing where they say, society is becoming increasingly more cruel, and we are finding that we have less in common with our neighbors, or we have less in common with our fellow countrymen and things like that. Is there is that perception, and for a lot of people that perception becomes their reality. But I think you and I have seen, Rich, and to the point that you were making there, is people are gravitating to that the goodness in other people and the things that they are seeing in their community. And if they let their perceived reality become something that they've just taken out of the news or what they see on their social media feed or whatever, it's easy to get down and kind of lose sight of the good that's out there. But that, when we talk, when you said the perception, that perception gap, immediately in my mind, I go to More in Common, talks about the perception gap in terms of what people believe we have in common with each other and what we actually have in common with each other. And there's that large gap where they think, oh, well, if I'm a Republican, I've only got probably like 6 or 7 things in common with my Democrat friends. But there's a lot more than that they just don't see anymore.
Yeah, well, I think there are at least two things. One is if we insist, I've got to put some boundaries on this for me at least. If we insist that, we're going to filter things through our Democratic or Republican or, for that matter, independent lens, then I think we, as you know well, we are locked into a political frame. And then I think we do experience a certain kind of division. Mm-hmm. If we focus on what matters to us in our daily lives, right, what we find is that amid those political divisions, we want to work on a lot of things in common. Mm-hmm. because we care about them, because they affect our daily lives, because they matter to how strong our communities are and whether or not each of us and all of us are going to thrive. And I think the other thing I was going to mention is that we can get stuck, as you know, and as you're saying, in this perception gap. And I think if at least in the work that I do, the way out is not to try to bridge the perception gap. It's to tap into what people are yearning for.
Okay.
That's where the new moral vision sits. And what I would say is that the question is, we've got these midterms coming up, and everyone's saying, well, we just need to switch control of the Congress. And then we've got a presidential race. We just need to switch who's in the White House. And that may all be true, but don't forget, we went from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And I think the question is, what's the wave that will get us beyond this political frame? And I think it's a new moral vision that addresses the values people really care about and the issues that we can and will rally around so that we can get things moving in a can-do way.
Yeah. No, and I think that's hugely important. And yeah, I don't want, certainly this conversation, but even anything, like a lot of the things that I talk about, I don't want them to be framed in just a political context.
Oh, no, yeah.
Because, and I think that's hugely important because the reality is we as citizens, I mean, our political identities and our political convictions, that's just part, I would hope, and I think you would hope, that that's just a small part of who we are as individual human beings. It's not the whole of our identity, even though a lot of people have made it into that. But when we talk about a moral vision or moral clarity as individual human beings and the things that we have in common with our other human beings, a lot of those other things become a lot easier in terms of how we view the world. And if people get too stuck on one particular part of what their societal norms or whatever the societal norms they want to live by are, and they get stuck in that one thing, well, if that thing isn't going your way, then you become miserable. And it's one of those natural things. The same way with political. And you go, talk about how you went from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. Well, when people have taken their vision of what the society they want to live in and put it strictly in that political lens, well, every 4 years or every 2 years, you just become miserable because your guy is not there or your people are not there, right? But as a society as a whole, if we start working together for that common vision and what we want to do, and not frame or place all of our happiness in the political bucket or the religious bucket or the what's happening here bucket, I think we need to think in terms of bigger things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you put your finger on something. I think if we ask the question, what kind of society do we want? And what makes it up? What enables it? What literally works to create it? You wouldn't say politics alone.
I would hope not.
Right? You would say the relationships we have, the ways in which we work together, the things that we believe, the norms that we have in our communities and in the country, the kinds of lives we create for one another. Like when I work in DeSoto County, Florida, which has been hit by 4 storms in the last 2 years, and they're really great. They've gotten knocked down and they're really great at getting back up and being resilient, but they would say their community isn't thriving. So when you ask them, well, what will create a thriving community for you? It's not politics. It's whether or not people can come together and get stuff done. It's whether or not people have a belief in one another. And so I think that's why we need a new way to talk about and think about these things, or else we're going to continue, I believe, we're going to continue to fall back into a political frame because there's no alternative pushing against it.
That's right. Well, and so I think about a couple of things there, Rich, because one of the things that I've been saying for quite some time now is and this goes to throwing everything into that political lens is if you believe the government is the solution to or the cause of all of your problems, one way or another you're going to lose. And then I also talk about the concept of subsidiarity and finding solutions with our community members to common cause problems closest to home. Finding that part of community. And this is another thing that stood out in your article that well, it means a lot to me as part of Braver Angels, because part of our next chapter at Braver Angels is really finding what we call courageous citizenship, but it really does start through that lens of being an individual. And then how does that translate into how are we going to work within our community to find those things, and then that scales out to nationally. And I noticed that you talked in your article as well about individual, community, and then how that affects us as a nation. So talk to that arc a little bit for me, would you?
Yeah, well, I think this is what led me to the New Moral Vision and the New Civic Path, which is that I think we face a crisis of belief in the country, and that belief in institutions, in leaders, in religious institutions, in increasingly civic organizations and institutions, and in each other. And I think increasingly in ourselves. We doubt so many things. And so that crisis of belief, we might elect a new president, but we still may not believe that we can make a difference. We still may not believe that our voice really matters. We still may not believe that we can come together and get things done. And so I think we've got to find a way to address this crisis of belief. I think that does start with individuals feeling that they are seen and heard, that their voice is valued, that they have a sense of dignity, that they have a sense of agency, that they can join with others amid our real differences and still do things that we can build together. And in order for that to happen, that can't start in Washington, D.C. or a state capital. It can be augmented, it can be complemented, it can be supplemented. But this is the work that we need to do in recreating a sense of belief that we can actually come together with others across differences, right? The differences aren't going to always go away. And so that's why I think it's so important, because this is about how we choose to show up as individuals, how we choose to engage with others, how we do that in community, because community is where we can get this done and make it happen. Yeah. And then to your point, I think one of the great lessons of American history, for this country at least, is that so much of the significant change that we've created in our society started first in local communities and then spread and then rolled along, and then eventually national leaders, courageous, you're talking about courageous citizens, courageous leaders stepped forward with others and said, okay, let's make something happen here, something larger. Yeah. But I think it's got to start with people, and I think it's got to start in our local communities, hopefully augmented by national and state leaders.
Yeah. People come to me and they're like, well, I don't have a big circle of influence. I don't have a podcast or a radio show or any of these big platforms. What am I going to do? People feel like they've lost that sense of agency, and you, I think you hit on it there a minute or two ago, Rich. It starts with being seen, feeling heard, renewing that sense of dignity that a person has. And really, I think the big thing to take away from that is it does not take a huge circle of influence. I mean, you don't have to have some big monstrosity of a platform. I mean, I love to use Gandhi's quote, be the change that you want to see in the world. Talk about some of the things that you found. You did a lot in Selma in terms of what the community has done. And Selma has been one of those communities, going back all the way, back to the civil rights era. But they're still doing amazing things today.
They are doing amazing things. They're doing amazing things. Folks in Reading, Pennsylvania are doing amazing things. We're about to release a new report on the work that we did with people in Alamance County, North Carolina over 3 or 4 years. We just released 2 separate reports of individual counties in Jim Jordan's congressional district in Ohio that did amazing things. Here's the thing, Wilk, that goes to your point about not needing a major platform, where I would add to that, not needing a comprehensive plan, is that in all the change that I've seen happen in communities, it always started with small actions that catalyzed and unleashed a chain reaction that took root and had the ability to grow and spread over time. And whether it's in Reading, Pennsylvania, which was declared the poorest community in America 10 years ago, Selma, Alabama, where not long ago I sat in the basement of Tabernacle Baptist Church, where they helped plan the walk over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or in Alamance County, which is probably the most divided place from start to finish that I've worked in 40 years. In every single case, the change started small and grew. And when it did, people realized that they could address things like youth, like mental health stigma, like whole health, like homelessness, like housing, like men in transition coming out of prison and looking for a better life for themselves. All of these things people affected. They didn't have comprehensive plans. They didn't have big platforms. None of this cost a lot of money.
Right.
Didn't cost a lot of money. In fact, money might have gotten in the way in a lot of cases because it would have distracted and diverted people's attention. And in the process, people renewed and I think this is really critical, people renewed their spirit, their can-do spirit, that we can actually come together and not just talk, but get things done.
Right.
And in getting things done, we can then start to imagine how we can put the country back on a better path. And I think that's really an important part of this.
I think it's hugely important, Rich, because there's so much, and this is where that distinction between big platforms and grassroots action comes from, in my mind. And this is where a paradigm shift is needed for a lot of people. Is just think about it this way. I mean, think about some of the greatest things that have happened in the history of this country, and I would probably add some of the more meaningful things that have happened in this country happened long before, we had anything called like an online influencer or, these big platforms where people have millions of followers and things like that. And I would argue that they're many of them are more corrupted by that desire for clicks and things. I mean, that's how we get the word of the year last year for Merriam-Webster or whatever was rage bait, right? I mean, the real meaningful change comes again in the basement of a church somewhere, or
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, Wilk, is that I've started to say on our campaign that politics can't save us.
That's right.
And I have a lot of friends who hear that and they're like, "What, are you out of your mind? You must be nuts. Of course politics is going to save us. What the hell else is going to save us?" And yet, when I think about good people who are running for office right now on both sides,
sure,
inevitably, they have to take hard political positions. Inevitably, they're going to run negative ads. Inevitably, they're going to try to undermine their opponents. Inevitably, they're likely to say things that are only half true. That's the nature of the beast that they've decided to be part of. And the things, I just want to circle this back to the conversation that we were having earlier, because I think it's so important that politics can't save us, because the things that we need, politics can't produce. It's why the work that you do in Braver Angels and the work that I do at the Institute and other people do, all across the country in other ways is so important, because politics can't create community. It can create a community of change agents in support of a politician.
Sure. That's a huge important point. Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about here. It can't create meaning for us in our daily lives. It can't create a sense of connection. It can't create a sense of community. It can't create, in the sense that we're talking about it, a sense of belief.
Right.
And those things are up to us.
Yeah.
And they require leaders for sure, but that's different than politics.
Right. No, that's absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because, and I don't want our conversation to be about politics, but politics seems to cloud people's judgments.
Mm.
In they think too often. I think people get that false impression that politics steers community, and it should be the other way around. And this is
Yeah.
this is I think something that is lost on too many people, Rich. We've gotten into that paradigm where they're like, and I've had conversations with politicians, I'm sure you have too. Well, we have to do it this way because if we don't, and if we don't take this negative hard line, the other side's going to, and then we've got to live by their rules. But that is the mentality that gets that pendulum swinging out of control. It gets our Overton window on so many things out of whack. If we want a community where we trust each other and we believe in each other and we make the decisions and live by the rules that we want to live by, it takes community. It takes trusting our neighbor. It takes building institutions that are worthy of trust. That all starts with individuals. That is not something guided, again, by Washington. Community needs to guide our politics. Our politics should not be guiding our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I would probably amend that it's about. I think it does start with individuals because individuals are the actors in a sense, right? I think two things. One is, as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, so what are we getting at here? Mm-hmm. And one thing is, because we're, as you said, we don't want to make this all about politics, but we've circled back to it now a few times. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, one of the questions is, so what's the breakthrough here? And if one thinks it's politics, to your last point, the pendulum will just keep swinging, particularly now, because we're essentially at an impasse. And everything I know about impasses in working in communities and other places is that at an impasse, there might be agreement about what's wrong, but never about what we should do, which is why you keep having a pendulum swing.
Right.
And until you get something that disrupts the pendulum swinging, you will remain in impasse. In fact, you go deeper into impasse, which is, I think, where we are right now. I happen to think that the breakthrough is, these are my words, but a new civic path, because as we're saying, it brings people together. It gets them to agree on what we can agree on. You start to build, and you engender a greater sense of belief that we can actually come together and get things done. And then people inevitably say, well, if that's the case, but we don't agree on anything, which I know you hear every single day. And I'm like, actually, no, there's a new moral vision. It's not that I've created it. It's that this is what's emerging across the country. And the question is, will we listen hard enough? Will we listen carefully enough? Will we be attuned to it and tap into it in a way that creates a new wave of momentum moving forward? And I think that's our at least from where I'm sitting, that's our shared task.
Yeah. So if we think about what this new moral vision is, right? Because we are made up of a whole lot of individuals in this country with different visions of what morality is and how we all fit into this bigger puzzle, of e pluribus unum. So that moral vision, then, Rich, how does one individual from the next individual see themselves in that new moral vision?
That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked it. So I think when you think about a moral vision for society, as opposed to our individual moral visions, I think, when I work with faith communities across the country, one of the challenges is as soon as you start talking about things around community, people of different faiths or of different denominations begin to defend their doctrinal beliefs. And before you know it, you're kind of in a war here. And one of the things I've found that unlocks that is to say to folks, I'm not asking you to give up your doctrines and beliefs and your teachings and your texts. I'm wondering whether or not there's something that we can work on together that has a civic purpose that allows you to maintain your beliefs. We need to transcend them. And I think that's true for a moral vision. So I think there are different, as you know, there are different notions of decency and dignity and all sorts of things in different teachings. But I think there is a common basis upon which we think decency can and should exist, upon which belonging can and does exist, upon which dignity should and can exist. And I think it's that ground that we have to move toward and not ask people to give up their identity and their beliefs all the time in service of something civic.
Right.
And I think that's the only thing I've seen that can unlock this division, that, to your point, this perception of division that we've locked ourselves into.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I love the idea of bringing it back to the idea of what can we, I mean, it's got to be that shared vision of what the civic fabric of this nation is, right? And I think civic is the one word that people often forget about, you know, and especially when they start thinking about morality, right? And trying to interject their morality into where everything else fits. And but I think if we recognize that, again, going back to that idea of e pluribus unum, there are a lot of us here, of many one.
That's right.
And we are going to share this country that belongs to all of us, because you cannot just continue to have a civil society while dismissing a whole portion of the people that make it up. So we have to find, if we can tie that morality back to what does a civic society look like, we can hold our strongly held convictions and live our life in that way, but bring it back to center and say, this is what that civic Overton window needs to look like. If you want to do a little bit out here, that's fine. You want to do a little bit out here, that's fine. But our civic Overton window has to remain centered, and we all have to be able to agree on that to make this thing work. Because if you don't, what's the alternative?
Exactly. Well, the alternative is what you were getting at earlier, I think, which is, you know, the influencers online will rule, the loudest and most divisive voices in politics will rule, the most divisive advocacy organizations will take over. I mean, this is where actually I started this whole new civic campaign, which was, we have a vacuum in public life that's everyone's retreated or they're in a fight mode. And, you know, people of good faith, I don't mean religious faith, good civic faith, have retreated. They're so beat up, and that we need to return and fill this vacuum, or else, to your point, what's the alternative?
Right.
But, you know, for me, the grounding, and I suspect this is true for you, whenever I wonder whether or not any of this can work and whether or not it matters and whether or not it's realistic, I just think about the different people I've been working with in different places across the country, that the news, you know, if there was a news article about it, they would say, oh, these people could never work together and produce something. And yet, you know, I've said this to you before, Wilk, you know, in Jim Jordan's congressional district, I can't tell who voted for the congressman and who didn't.
Right.
I worked there for 3 years with folks, 4 years. I still can't tell. I don't know. It never really comes up. And I'm sure at least, 65% of folks in those counties voted for the president. So let's just say half of the people I'm working with voted for I can't tell who voted for the president and who voted for Congressman Jordan and who didn't.
Yeah.
And what I can tell, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm on a soapbox, but what I can tell is that people across the spectrum want a greater sense of decency in our society.
Yeah.
They believe that belonging is really important. They believe that decency is really critical. They want youth to thrive. They know everyone, so many people they know suffer from mental health dilemmas, that we've got to address it. They know there isn't affordable housing because people are having to move farther and farther away to find affordable places to live. And so they want these things to be fixed. And I think importantly, they not only want them fixed, they want to do it in a way that creates a better country that reflects the better parts of us.
No, that's right. That's absolutely right. And I don't know how much, Rich, you're familiar with the Dignity Index and what like Tim Shriver and Tammy Pfeiffer and them have done over there. But you talk about the Dignity Barometer, and they came up with data that shows like 94% of all Americans want all human beings treated with a large degree of dignity and understanding. But then out of that same polling, there's only like 30% of them that believe that's actually happening right now. That is a big gap.
It's huge.
So it's like, how do we close that gap, between those that want everybody treated with dignity and actually feel people are being treated with dignity? And that's why I know that's one of the reasons that you work so hard at the work that you do at the Harwood Institute. One of the reasons I do so much work with, Braver Angels, Pro Human Foundation, other organizations that I work with. I truly believe that most people, and to your point about, Jim Jordan's district, most people, whether they voted for President Donald Trump or not, want the best for this country and their neighbors.
Yeah. Most
people want the best thing for their kids, their neighbors' kids, their parents, it's just there's tweaks that need to be made, some paradigm shifts that need to happen in order for us to get there. And the reality, Rich, is I love the work that you've done with the new civic path, this new moral vision. Yeah, and it being a civic vision. These things, they're not, let's face it, it's not rocket science. It's humanity and recognizing the humanity in our fellow human beings, our fellow countrymen. And people who, like you said, have checked out, that whether you call them the exhausted middle or the silent majority, whatever you want to call them, those people that have checked out need to check back in, because that gap is created when the voices that want what we want stop talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the question becomes, okay, what's the path back in, right? And obviously there are many paths back in. That's why we're talking today. But yeah, that's, the more I travel across the country, the more, I don't say convinced, the more it becomes apparent, whether you call it the new civic path or something different. There is this yearning. People are looking for a way back. They don't know what it is yet. But when they hear of possibilities, as you know, in your work with Braver Angels and Pro Human Foundation and other things, people will step forward.
They will. Yep, you and I have you and I have had an opportunity to speak with a lot of them. There are a lot of great people out there doing incredible things. And Rich, the work that you're doing with the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation has always been something that I've truly admired. And yeah, for all those people listening to this that don't know what that path is to get back in, and to get involved, to help change your perception of things, maybe they're out there. We meet them every day. You and I talk to them every day, Rich.
Yeah.
You've got a lot more people out there that want to do things, and you and I get to talk to them. And everybody out there listening, make your voice heard. Make it happen.
You're here. Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me again. I always enjoy being with you. I always admire all the work that you're doing. It's tireless and really important.
Thank you so much, Rich Harwood. I appreciate it. We will do it again.
Sounds good.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.